And reading is part of how you develop that internal monologue and how you develop that thought process, that process of thinking, that is just, it's like essential to being human, I think, and consciousness and developing your consciousness. So I think that what's happened is because people don't spend time doing that, but yet they crave it. They get a little taste of it from these pop intellectuals. And then they think they've done the thinking themselves. So what happens is it becomes voyeurism, voyeuristic intellectualism.
Welcome, everybody, to the Will Spencer podcast. My guest this week is Courtenay Turner. Courtenay is the host of the Courtenay Turner podcast, co-host of Dangerous Dames and What is Movement. She's also a speaker and aerial acrobatic performer. Having spent her academic career largely steeped in the world of philosophical and psychological texts, and being a passionate athlete and performing artist, this paved the way for the world in which she is currently immersed. Many today know her as the host of the Courtenay Turner podcast, where she boldly seeks truth, diving into a myriad of deep topics surrounding issues of health, fitness, medicine, philosophy, psychology, politics, geopolitics, and socio-cultural zeitgeist. Courtenay Turner, welcome to the Will Spencer podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
I've been very much looking forward to this conversation because you have a mastery of occult, theosophical topics and understanding how they feed into our world today that I don't think I've ever seen anyone express such a deep and comprehensive understanding of all the many, they'll call it tentacles that stretch into culture and politics. And so I've been really looking forward to having this conversation.
Well, thank you so much. I don't know that I'm the expert, but I've definitely spent some time digging into this stuff. So
Yeah. Well, you did the reading and going back to the primary sources, because you can talk about Blavatsky and theosophy. I saw that you talked about Heidegger as well. And you can talk about these things from the position of, well, I've read books about them, or you can actually go read their books and see what they had to say in their own words. And as I'm sure you know, that's an incredibly revealing process.
yes, yes, definitely reading the primary sources reveals way more. So,
Yes.
and I often feel like it's really helpful. If you read the primary sources, you read it from people who are on the inside, who are they're not coming from a critical bias. I mean, everybody has a bias, you can only see through your eyes, right? So they're always going to come from bias. But I feel like when you read secondary sources, particularly ones that are critical, it's already slanted and selected. So you don't have as much to parse through and make
Hmm.
your own, assessments. So I actually like reading from those who are promoting it, the insiders. I feel like they reveal way more. And then it's up to me. I can use my discernment. What do I agree with? What do I disagree with? How do I feel about it? But it's not already curated for me. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's not going to confirm your existing biases. One of the books I've been talking about recently is Black Sun by Nicholas Goodrick Clark. And so he talks about how all these influences feed into like neo-Nazism, but he's only going to pick out the bits that support his thesis naturally, as opposed to who was Helena Blavatsky and what was she really about, etc.
Yes, exactly. So
So
true.
what originally sparked your interest? Well, maybe we can talk a little bit first about your origin story. How did you get into talking about this stuff? It's sort of a, I mean, pun intended, esoteric world to find your way into.
Yeah, pun intended for sure.
Yes.
It was like the least likely place for me to end up, although knowing my history, it kind of all did come together. I mean,
Hmm.
if hindsight's 2020, but if you were to ask me even 5 years ago, did I think I'd be doing what I do now? I probably would have said no, and I would have thought it was crazy. I mean, I had no
Same.
idea. I had never listened to podcasts. I didn't know what they were in 2020.
Mm.
Like here's kind of a funny story. Like someone hearing my birth story had recommended that I should be on Rogan, and I said, "What? Why? What's a Rogan? Why do I need to be on it?"
What's a
Like,
Rogan?
yeah, I mean, that's how clueless I was.
Amazing.
I'm like, "What's a Rogan? Why do I need to be on it?"
Yes.
And they were explaining, "Oh, he's like one of the top podcasts." I'm like, "What's a podcast?"
Yeah, of
So I don't have that impression anymore. I'm very aware
course.
of who Rogan is. Yeah. I did my homework and, ended up deciding I wanted to start a podcast. But what happened was 2020, that was my kind of awakening,
Hmm.
uh, quote unquote. That term seems to be in great debate currently. So,
Right.
but that was I was very much asleep. I would make the joke that it took me forever to find the train station. I found the high speed rail, and I've been scrambling to catch up since then.
Mhm.
But I mean, I was very much in the dark. I was in the entertainment industry. I was in a sea of leftists in New York City and then in California, and I was never politically, at least I didn't identify or align with the left. But I usually tried to keep my views pretty quiet. When I had moved to LA a few years into my being there, somebody had invited me into a quote unquote very secret underground group, a fellowship that was so secret it was on the front page of the New York
Oh,
Times.
okay.
Yeah, otherwise known as the FOA, the Friends of Abe. And this was like a fellowship for they say conservative, but it was really anybody who was not on the left who was in the entertainment industry, because so many people were experiencing cancel culture to the extent where they were getting blacklisted. They couldn't get work if they were to say anything that didn't fully align with the mainstream narrative at the time. So they created a fellowship. It was Gary Sinise who had started
Mhm.
it, and I had joined that. So then I got a little bit more outspoken. I ended up writing for something called Politichicks, and doing some interviews. And, I got a little bit more outspoken at the time, but I was really for so long just stayed out of it because, of the potential ramifications of speaking up. So
Mhm.
it was just not something that I was ever expecting I would end up in. But then in 2020, I was working for 2 gyms. I was a CrossFit coach and a personal trainer, and I was also an aerial acrobatic performer, but I would speak. So I would share my birth story and use the performance as an example, a testament to what was possible when nobody thought it was. So, I mean, it was fun to do, which I enjoyed it. So, there was that too. But it was really talking about movement from the philosophical perspective, movement as a metaphor for life, and using physical training as a teacher to help you overcome adversities in other areas of life.
Mhm.
So that's what I was doing. Of course, 2020 came around. I got fired from both gyms. I can't prove it, but I'm 99.999, repeating forever,
Mhm.
sure that it was over politics. And then,
Oh,
of course, all the events that I was doing, all the performing, those all got canceled. For a little while, I started doing some on Zoom, but it's showing videos of Ariel is not quite the same.
yeah.
So, yeah, and even speaking on Zoom, it's just not quite the same. So, I ended up, not being able to continue much of that. And yeah, so I found myself incredibly isolated. Everybody was wearing a mask. I was in Santa Monica, California,
Oh.
where, it was pretty tyrannical. And so I found myself just incredibly isolated and really depressed, like extremely depressed. I didn't realize how much I still depended on nonverbal communication for clarity of speech until all the coping mechanisms I had spent my life developing, were then stripped from me. So I was born hearing impaired. I'm blind in one eye. I had heart surgery as a year old, a whole bunch of complications from birth. And I got hearing aids when I was about 6 years old, but I had learned how to speak by reading lips. So I still depend a lot on the nonverbal. Which is why even people who wanted to be anonymous will come on my show, and I'll tell them I won't take anonymous people anymore, by the way, because
Yeah.
all of them rescind it always. They always retract it, and I'm like, this is too much time, too much energy. I'm not doing it. So, but I have done it a couple of times, and I've told them you still have to have it on video because I need to be able to see your lips. Otherwise, unless it's in person. So, yeah, so I found myself just in a position where I was really, really depressed. And some people had suggested I start a podcast, and as I had said, I had no idea what those were. I was completely clueless, but I started listening to podcasts when someone mentioned that, and that became kind of it was like my friends, I guess the way people used to feel about watching TV. They're in your living room, and they kept me company for my long hikes where I would drive an hour and a half away to go for a hike, so I didn't have to worry about being arrested on a mountain by myself for having a naked face, or being, out on the beach much and bearing my naked face that was such a potential threat to people. But listening to these podcasts was, a way to pass the time and not to feel so alone. And then it dawned on me that, if I started one, then at least I could have naked face conversations. And I didn't, I had no idea where it would go or if I would even continue. But even remotely through a digital interface, I felt that it would do so much for, sorry, my morale and for my, just, yeah, my emotional well being. And so I decided that I would start it. And I made a commitment for 6 months. And I told all the guests that I may never air it, that I really just wanted to start 6 months, see how this goes, and, I wanted to be able to have conversations with people, meaningful discussions, and see their faces while I did so. And, so, yeah, I did, and people seemed to enjoy it, and so that was in 2020. I really didn't I think I aired my first episode, like, January of 2021. And yeah, I had started it very much in the political sphere, also in the medical freedom. Obviously, I was really pushing back against things, that they were, advocating that I was not in favor of. um, I had the final straw before I left was a woman chasing me down the street wearing a mask, and she had a knife in her hand, and she was screaming at me, telling me that I was a murderer because I had a naked face.
Wow.
So there were many experiences, but that was kind of one of the final straws where I was like, I think it's time for me to go. And I really did start thinking, if we could just get the right people in office, then, we could turn this whole thing around. And I kept saying that the Republican Party is behaving as a controlled opposition for the left, and that about a few months in, I was like, no, they were created to be controlled opposition for
Mhm.
the left. And I think I really got, I started to go much deeper. It was. I wanna say it might have been December of, 2020, but I'd have to go back and look exactly when, but a friend of mine at midnight, and I don't know why, midnight was, like, during that time period when I'm ready to, call it a night, or I shouldn't have been up anyway, but everybody has emergencies, and, you have to check this out, and, a friend of mine sent me this video from Dr. John Coleman and said, "Have you ever seen this?" And it was his Committee of 300 video, which actually is still on YouTube, surprisingly enough.
Oh,
And I said, "No, I've never heard of him." And he said, "Oh, okay, you have to watch this and then call me back. It's midnight. Of course, I have to watch it right now." But it was 2020, and a lot of people had nothing to do, so I guess that's what we did. And so I did, and then I was riveted, and I started looking online for all of his books, and I found one that was retailing on Amazon for almost $4,000. Now you can get it for $25,
mhm.
plus, shipping and tax and whatever, but it's 25, much more affordable. I don't know if they've edited or whatnot, but at the time, I was not paying, $4,000. I didn't have that kind of disposable income.
For a book?
Uh, yeah, exactly. So I did not purchase the book. I did go and get an online PDF, but I read it 3 times in a week because it was very captivating. And
Wow.
it was such it was the Tavistock book, the Institute of Human Relations. And I read it 3 times in a week because for me, it kind of converged all the fields I had been immersed in, the entertainment industry with the culture, philosophy, psychology, and around 2010, 2011 is when, a lot of people in that group, FOA, have been buzzing about the Frankfurt School and how it had infiltrated the entertainment industry. So I had done quite a bit of research, and I was a philosophy major also. So I was very familiar with those philosophers and psychologists, but had a very different perspective on them in the 2010s time frame, and so I had already done a dive in that, and the Tavistock kind of intersected the two, and I think once you start diving into that stuff, you can't really ignore the occult um, groupings that are kind of the hidden hands behind things. So Yeah. Sorry, it was a long-winded.
No, no, no. It's funny, your answer, I sort of feel like I've been transported back to where I was at in 2020.
Yeah.
I'd spent a long time in the new age, and I was aware of a lot of the names that I'm sure we'll get into, but
Mhm.
remembering the medical freedom, remember the masking, remembering all the videos going around at the time because 'cause we're all locked inside having to watch
Yeah.
YouTube and listen to podcasts. And it's funny that you mentioned the John Coleman book, The Committee of 300, because
Yep.
another one of my guests, Mike Williams, who does a lot of work with the Beatles, he referenced that book as well
Okay.
as very
Mhm.
formative for him. I wasn't aware that it was $4,000 at one point on Amazon, but that was also a very formative book for him, Tavistock. And of course, man, I haven't heard about the Frankfurt School. That was the whole big thing for a couple of years there. I mean, obviously they're still very influential, but yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, it was, so before I actually had my own podcast, it's what everybody brought me on to talk about was the Frankfurt School, because most of the people I was surrounded by were leftists, and they kept telling me, "This is a crazy conspiracy theorist," and I was like, "I don't know why people are calling this a conspiracy theory, it's literally, like, mainline history." I
Yeah.
mean, this is part of anybody who's taken a philosophy class knows about these philosophers, like, this is or anybody who's studied psychology 101 knows these psychologists, so I don't really understand. And then somebody sent me a Wikipedia excerpt, and it literally right under Frankfurt School says conspiracy theory. And I was like, this is crazy. I mean, this is just like mainline, academic material. This is history. But a lot of the people who I knew at the time who were doing podcasts were mostly on the left, and they would bring me on to, kind of argue with me about the Frankfurt School.
What did they argue? Did they say the Frankfurt School didn't exist, or that these guys didn't say what their writings say that they said? Like, what was their position?
Well, they argued, the Wikipedia point that talking point that it was a conspiracy theory, so it wasn't real, and these are just misinterpreted philosophers, and that they weren't really trying to subvert anything. And I'm like, "You all you have to do is read Marcuse." Like, literally, he says, "Liberating tolerance would mean accept everything from the left and reject everything from the right." That is a quote. It's a direct quote. It's not, this isn't like interpretive kind of, you know, manipulative language games. This is just direct quote from him. So
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. You may support what they're doing. That's fine. You can argue that you think that their stance is justifiable, but they were just arguing with me that I was crazy and making things up. And okay, well, I had one guy who brought me on a couple of times, and he. I mean, he would always tell me because I would get into debates with him all the time, and I remember one time I went to his house and I actually brought a stack of books. And I said, okay, we want to discuss this, like let's talk about it. And I had brought a stack of books to his house. And he said, "Oh, Courtney, I can't read primary sources from philosophers." And I said, "So you've spent like the past year arguing with me about these thinkers that you've never read?" And he said,
Right.
"Well, I read the, secondary or tertiary sources." And I'm like, "So you don't know what they've actually said?" And he said, "Well, I can't understand the primary source." I'm like, "So you don't know what they said. How can you be arguing with me?" I mean, it's fine. I'm not telling you have to read them, but don't argue with me about something you've never read.
Mhm. That sounds like a personal problem that you can't read these sources and yet you're gonna argue with me who actually has. Maybe I shouldn't talk to you anymore. We might not be on the
Uh,
same intellectual level.
it was interesting.
Yes, I can imagine. So you were in Santa Monica at the time, I
Mhm.
believe you said, and so I imagine that that was all these big shifts, your egg being removed from a CrossFit gym. That's a little weird because I always thought that CrossFit guys were a little bit more on the conservative side.
You would think so. And actually, one of the gyms I worked at, the owner, it was two owners, and one of them was actually a good friend of mine. That's how I ended up falling into the position. It was like I took the certification just for myself, but I lived very close to the gym, and I was friends with the owner. And one day, I showed up for class, and they were talking about how the coach just didn't show up that morning, and that's why the owner was teaching.
Oh.
And I said, I live, where I live, because he would always come to use my building's pool. So he knew where I lived. And he was like, and I said to him, I have my certification. If you're ever in a position where that happens, I mean, I can't promise, but if I'm available, I'm happy to coach. Well, it was happening for like consecutively for a month. And they just kept asking me. Can you come? Can you come?" And, yeah, finally he's like, I think we should just hire you because, yeah, clearly, there were problems there. But that was how I ended up doing it. I mean, I had gotten the certification already, but he was, a friend of mine. We always he knew where I stood, like, we were not exactly aligned, but they were both Navy SEALs, and I had made a comment about how, I literally just repeated, the Ben Franklin line that if you're willing to trade your security for a little bit of, sorry, a little bit of freedom for security, then you deserve neither. I'm
Mhm. Of
paraphrasing it, but that's
course.
the gist of it. And he, they had such a hard time. They said, "You don't understand the younger generation and what they've been through." And I mean, they just railed against me for a good half hour, telling me that I was an idiot. And I was shocked. Like, wow. I mean, these are Navy SEALs. Like, I didn't think that was a controversial kind of statement, but yeah, and then the other one, it was over some of the, requirements at the time, and
Mhm.
because I'm hearing impaired, I was like, "I can't do this." Yeah. So,
Mm.
yeah.
That's, I mean,
And
I think one of
that
the
gym was super woke though. Like the other, there were 2. That the one I worked there, the one that was closer to me that I ended up working at 2, but the other gym was super woke, like overtly woke. The one that
oh,
was my friends was they were definitely clearly they had more woke kind of sensibilities. They were definitely not politically aligned, but it wasn't super overt until then.
got it. So they didn't make it super obvious that, they were on the left. It wasn't like they had rainbow pride flags hanging up. You only
The
discovered.
other gym did. The other one that I got
Okay.
fired from did, and I had, the one of my coworkers at the, gym with the 2 Navy SEALs had brought me into that other gym,
Mhm.
and she had reached out to me and said she was so disappointed in me because I didn't put a black square for Blackout Tuesday.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, and, I tried just to be polite. I always knew she was, like, a radical feminist, she's a hardcore leftist, and, I knew we were not super aligned, but very sweet girl, and, like, we were definitely friendly, so I didn't see any reason to be confrontational with her. I just said, "I think we can do a lot more, for a cause in person than, virtue signaling with a square on my Instagram," and she just kept pushing back, telling me that I had a responsibility, and she said, "We can't just be white feminists." And that was when I was like, "Wow." And I kind of was just baffled. I said, I've never claimed to be a feminist, so I'm a little confused. Uh,
It's
and
funny when you
that
get Go ahead.
what?
Well, it's funny when you get roped into a "we" that you didn't quite realize that you were a part of.
Yes, yes. So, yeah, that got me a, earful, or rather a eyeful of text that I really had no interest in engaging with, and I really just tried to be very polite and dismissive, but, they were continuously coming after me on all the platforms, and, you know how the, swarm tactics go, so I'm very familiar with them now, but that was my foray into social media swarm, gang stalking.
Don't I know about the social media swarms? It seemed, and that's one of the oddest things about our age today is it feels very much like if you cross a certain line, you'll get it from both the left and the right these days, especially the right these days. But, I was in the manosphere a couple years ago, 2020 to
Right.
2022, roughly. And I observed even back then that, like, okay, so I expected to make the left mad with talking about feminism and stuff like that. But I was completely unprepared for just how bad a right wing swarm would be when you make the bros mad. The bros are so much worse, and, like, that's just an odd facet of our age where it's like, okay, so maybe we don't have to worry about censorship as much as we used to. Like, I know that, I posted, oh my goodness, I posted a clip of myself on a podcast that I was on, and we'll call it 2021, right? Something like that. I posted a clip from someone else's podcast, and I posted it last year, 2024, probably even after the election, something like that. And I was talking about the jab and all the different stuff. And even 3 years later, I got a hard warning over medical misinformation from 3 years prior of stuff that's all been validated now. And
Right.
and so that was one form of censorship where the
Mhm.
dialogue is controlled by
Sure.
by institutional forces, but now we're seeing it enforced by bot armies or I don't know, ideologues. I don't really know what, but it's a sad facet of
Cybernetic algorithmic feedback loops is essentially what's going on. Yeah.
say more about that.
There's a lot to say about that, but
Mm,
that's where we're at. So this firstly, I'll just a little. I think you may have seen this, but funny story about like pissing off both the left and the right of the dialectic. I
yeah.
posted a video on Instagram because I'm so censored on Facebook and Instagram. I've kind of just stopped posting anything significant. It's mostly just like my fitness material. I started my Instagram as a like training diary for when I tried out for American Ninja Warrior.
Mhm.
So I've just kind of left it as more of a fitness blog kind of thing. But I posted a video. It wasn't even like on my main page. It was on my story of me deadlifting, and some guy reached out to me to tell me that I was a feminist because I liked working out. And I was like, this is like the most asinine thing I've heard of like in a very long time. But it was so funny that I posted it. I was like, this is just hilarious. Um, and I was like, yeah, I was like, I remember a few years ago when they were saying that exercise is like extreme right wingism. And I was like, it's amazing. I've managed to piss off both sides of the dialectic by lifting a barbell. That's it.
My goodness.
Great. Good job, guys.
Well done.
But the worst of the swarms I've experienced is actually talking about the biodigital convergence stuff.
Mm.
And though they are vicious, vicious. And the only thing I can conclude is that they must be some sort of an operation. Where then there must be like bots involved. But I think that it is designed to discredit and gatekeep the information because came after me really hard when I shared a white paper. And I was like, that's like it's a white paper. And if you cared about the information getting out, wouldn't you be happy I shared, a white paper? So it was very, very strange, but it went on for a long time. Like I actually had to block most of those people, which is unfortunate because some of the information that they put out is great, but I don't need that kind of abuse in my life. So my emotional sanity was way more important. So I ended up blocking most of them. But yeah, so cybernetic, the algorithmic cybernetic feedback loop. So cybernetics is, a field of study. Uh, Norbert Wiener back in I think it was in the 50s, and it is this kind of study of essentially it's built on an extension of Tavistock socio-technical systems. This was like Eric Trist and Emery who were working on how people interact with technology and environments. This is really the very like broad brush strokes, kind of
Mhm.
clip notes, uh, you know, colloquial layman kind of terms, but that's essentially what it was. And cybernetics is studying feedback loops. And so now that the socio-technical systems have advanced so much, we're in an era where we really are already, people talk about the transhumanism, right? But we're already cybernetically engaged, and even our neurology has been altered by the screens. So
Oh.
the way we engage with information, the way that we process information has all been altered by our screen time. But cybernetics is this feedback loop, the study of feedback loops. So now we have these algorithms who data mine from people, and then they take that information, and it's all done mostly under the guise of marketing, like, right? We just want to target you with ads that you want to see,
Yeah.
so that when you talk about hip pain, we're gonna find like the thing that's gonna cure it, and we'll feed it right to you. Uh, just a silly example, but that's how they sell it to us. That's what that's about. And in part it is because obviously, so marketing is all about profiteering. And so, that is part of it. But part of it is also so they can data mine you and figure out what information to feed you. But what happens is that becomes a cyclical feedback loop where you're now becoming siloed and programmed. So this is why, we'll take Twitter as just an example, but it's just one social media example. And a really good document to look on this is the cognitive warfare document. This was done by NATO intelligence. This was back in 2020. And they talk about how they're going to use these cybernetic feedback loops and particularly weaponize emotions. So, and anger was a really big one. So, a lot of it is about targeting people to get a reaction. And
Mhm.
so it's heightened response because people who are either afraid or angry are much more susceptible to suggestion.
Mhm.
And so this way, now you've got these algorithms that are Like, with the example I was gonna say, when if you open up Twitter, for example, when I open my Twitter feed, although I have it set to all, and I don't even have any kind of specifications like that I select, but
Right.
based on my history, I'm fed a whole bunch of things, whether I follow these people or not. Now, somebody else may open their Twitter feed and see something totally different. This is because the algorithms have been not only feeding you, but they've been data mining you, and it's become cybernetic. So it's a feedback loop. They mine from you, and then they feed you information, which programs you, right? So now people, if I open my feed and all I see is racial violence, like people calling for racial violence, then I think, "Oh my goodness, this is what's going on everywhere."
Mm.
That's my impression because it's all I see when I go to my feed, and so it gives people an impression of what's going on. And what happens is, although that's becomes very heightened in the online sphere, because of course people are willing to say much more than they would if they were looking someone directly in the eye, right? Keyboard warriors are uh, much more bold than, say, people when they have to face the humanity of another person on the other
Right.
side, and they have to stare them in the eye. It's a very different experience. But what happens is that actually gets extrapolated into the real world because people's perception has been manipulated and twisted. So,
I'm marveling at the speed. I think you started out by saying you were trying to catch up to a high speed train. So I'm kind of marveling at the speed that you went from not knowing what a podcast was to 5 years in the future, like talking about cybernetic feedback loops and data mining. I mean, that must be a big transition for you within yourself and your understanding of yourself. Perhaps I can mention you're also married. I could maybe that's been a big part of. You don't have to talk about this, but your relationship as well. Of course, you're welcome to if you'd like. But like I'm just reflecting on how many of us have changed in the past 5 years into probably what are relatively unrecognizable versions of ourselves compared to where we were. So I'm anxious to dive into more of those topics, but maybe you can talk a little bit about that personal shift because I haven't heard anyone talk about it quite in the same way.
sure. Well, so for me, like I said, I was pretty asleep and, really just, I mean, when I say asleep, I mean, I was really asleep. Um, but I think people had planted seeds along the way.
Hmm.
And I think this is really important for people to understand because I know sometimes you get very frustrated when you have all this information. And I've been told by people, you're speaking over their head. Nobody knows what you're talking about. And I'm like, that's okay. Just plant the seeds. And that's why I always, bring receipts. So I know sometimes my material can get kind of boring because I will literally read the quotes, and I've had people say, they're like, you're literally just reading it. I'm like, yeah, because it's from the horse's mouth. So this is not me making it up. You can't, and I'm showing it on the screen, and I do that intentionally so that you can, then make your own decision. But now you know where to go read the rest of it. So I think it's really important for people to just plant the seeds because they don't have to get it then. And I know that's what happened for me. So I had people who were, I guess, what you call truthers. I kind of really hate that term
Yeah.
lately, but because it's been kind of co opted. But I had people in my life, who were in that sphere, and they really tried to open my eyes. And I was just not ready at all. And everybody's got their reasons. For me, it was because my dad and I had kind of we had a complicated relationship, but most of what he was willing to talk to me about was intellectual.
Mm.
So, he would talk to me about politics. He would, discuss, books, ideas, and I didn't know it at the time, but he was really a neocon. And so if I brought up any of the just, kind of narratives or questions that I had around this, I guess what you'd call it, the truth or space, he would tell me that that's crazy. It's conspiracy theory. You can't listen to these crazy people. And so I felt like I couldn't risk losing the relationship with my father to really investigate. So I really just shut it off. But I did have people along the way who kept planting the seeds. And then, of course, 2020 came around. My father had passed. And my now husband was very patient with me. He just
Mm.
kept kind of planting seeds. And
Mm.
he's like, oh, okay. I was ready to receive some things, I wasn't ready to receive others. But I think the big turning point for me was. I knew, when the supposed outbreak happened, I knew they were gonna start pushing jabs. I knew
Yeah.
that intuitively, that that's what that was all about, um, and I had such a bad feeling about it, so I started doing a lot of research, and at the time, I had been, totally pro jabs, like regular jabs,
Mhm.
so the narrative, and this is a whole rabbit hole that we don't have to go down. I mean, I know it's quite controversial for people, but I've studied it quite extensively. Um, and the whole terrain theory versus germ theory, just to give you the
Yeah.
umbrella.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So the narrative that I was told was that I was born with congenital rubella.
Mhm.
So, the story goes that my mom had germ measles during first trimester of pregnancy, and so they had done a test for the titer, but the doctor read the titer as being 112. And they said no, he was dyslexic, and it was really 121. My parents actually sued for my birth. Um, the alternative would have been abortion, and so
Mm.
it was considered a wrongful birth. Then they say wrong for life, but that was kind of the argument, was that they could have aborted me if the doctor hadn't been dyslexic. So yeah, so I have lots of opinions about that as well.
There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, so, I started doing a but of course, because I had been told my whole life that the whole reason I had all of these physical challenges was because my parents hadn't taken the, you know, rubella immunization. And so, of course, I've now become very familiar with Dr. Stephen Lanka, and who won't even allow himself to be called a virologist. He's like denounced his entire field and all his degrees. And he actually brought it to the Supreme Court of Germany, and nobody could disprove him. I think and he put up a lot of money for it. He said, I'm willing to pay anybody who can disprove me. I think it was Bart Braden or Bardens. I might be mispronouncing it, but who on a technicality. But yeah, he basically, it's the nobody's been able to disprove him, and so all that just to say that I started really researching, and I don't necessarily believe that that story is 100% accurate. But that narrative is what needs to be promulgated in order to sell the fear to sell the solution, which
Mhm.
is the jabs. And so I ended up writing a bunch of articles. One of them, which I wrote as a speculative piece on shedding, and I was really hoping to be proven completely wrong. At the time I was doing a publication, it was called Truth Matters. It was actually Aletheia Themata, Truth Matters in Greek. But
Mhm.
so I, but we, one of my business partners on that passed away,
Mhm.
actually because of jabs. Interestingly enough, she was in the military, and she had never been to a doctor like in her life. Very, very healthy. She was one of 11, and yeah, had never been to a doctor. And she had gotten away with 2 years. And then they found out. And when they found out, they insisted within 2 weeks that she get caught up.
Mhm.
And within 2 weeks of that, she developed cancer. And
Whoa.
the interesting thing is all the doctors she saw were very honest with her, that that's what triggered it. They did tell I mean, apparently she had a gene. She was, predisposed to this type of cancer, but they told her without those, injections, that she probably would never have, the epigenetic expression.
What?
Yeah.
We're sorry. Catch you next time. Oops. Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
yeah, if there's a reincarnation maybe, but, I don't know, I'm not
I don't
how that
know
works
about
out.
that. Nah, no, I don't know about that. But yeah, that's oh, the medical
So
field, what a
yeah, so I
disaster.
wrote on shedding, which I was really hoping would be disproven, and it was a speculative piece. I made it very clear it was a speculative piece, but I had 39 sources in it, so it was very well researched. And yeah, so I now have it up on my website. But at the time, like, it had gotten circulated, and a lot of doctors were passing it around, and it has very much been vindicated, unfortunately. So
Oh my goodness. I guess I was very happy to leave a lot of these discussions in the rearview mirror. I know there's a lot of conversation. I think it's a valid conversation about like, hey, why has no one been held accountable for any of this? Are we just going to forget that there was a whole 2 years that the whole world was shut down and we were forced to let go of our lives and everything? And I mean, I collected folders full of information during that whole time, undermining the narrative, and I could still present some of the stuff, and it just seems like there's a collective desire to kind of move on. Like, hey, that was a big L for civilization, but we'll be okay. But then as we talk about these things, it's like I don't know where the reckoning is going to come from, because it's so serious, the things that were done to all of us, that I understand that we're anxious to forget it. I surely am.
Yeah.
And where does accountability start to come in for these disasters?
Yeah, I don't know that there will be. I
Yeah.
know a lot of people really wanna see, retribution and justice, and I understand that, but I think that even if we do, it's gonna be kind of like Nuremberg, and Nuremberg to me was not a success. Like, this was basically the cover for Operation Paperclip, where we
Mm.
just scuttled in all of these scientists, right? And now we just put them under the American intelligence programs. And I think I don't really think it ever ended, but, that's obviously I can't prove that, but
So
there's a lot
the
of evidence to indicate that I'm right, though. And I think Annie Jacobson's done some really good work in that arena, but
when you say you don't think it ever ended, what do you mean? Do you mean specifically like Nazi National Socialist research, or is that what you? Because
yeah,
I've
all
encountered
the
some.
scientific research that they were doing, a lot of the bioweapons research they were doing. I think in many ways NASA was a cover for it. I think the American Cancer Association was also a really big kind of like funnel for the money, but a cover front. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much money that gets funneled into it. And, people can argue about what they actually accomplish. But I mean, the American Cancer Association, just go to their own website and of their own admission, they will say that we've received these exorbitant funds. I haven't seen it recently, but I remember the last time I was looking into it. I mean, it was like hundreds and hundreds of millions, like billions of dollars. And they were saying how, what we haven't really been able to make a dent, but, if you give us more money, we'll
Hmm.
solve the problem. And I'm sorry, I don't have the exact stats, so don't quote me on how much, but it's an
Fine.
exorbitant amount of money. Um, and yeah, they of their own admission though, they're like, we have not been able to even make a dent in this problem. But yeah, don't worry, keep sending us more money. So what exactly are you doing? And I think there's a lot of evidence to indicate that they're not trying to solve the problem because there's so many doctors who have come up with all sorts of great, wonderful things. And I don't know how much I can say here, so I'll just say great, wonderful things. And, they've been horrifically punished as a result. So,
Yes. So a good friend of mine, Tim, shout out Tim. He's big into medical freedom, holistic health. He's been a friend for about a decade or more actually at this point. And I remember back when COVID started to happen, back we're talking like February, March of 2020. I remember like we're both looking at this. He lives in Australia, so it's
yeah, yeah.
more or less straight up tyranny there. But
Oh, yeah.
we were both looking at that and being like, "Oh yeah, we know exactly where this is going." You could see right away like this is. But we didn't know at the time the where the jabs were going to be. What was going to be introduced to us at the time, and it's just to see how far it's all evolved. And again, no accountability, and how these are not problems that anyone is actually genuinely trying to solve. The system
No.
is merely trying to propagate itself at our expense, and the injustice is staggering when you see it that way.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the whole medical freedom movement, unfortunately, was really in many ways an op just to move the Overton
Oh,
window.
really?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. So,
Okay.
most people traditionally, historically, just look at it from this perspective. Most people, historically speaking, who were opposed to, who supported my body, my choice, not in the pro-abortion sense, but
Right.
they were typically actually on the left. There was a lot of like the crunchy moms, and yeah, they were just typically on the left, and they were into more holistic kind of medicine, and what happened in 2020 with the medical freedom movement came in, and suddenly they put a right wing banner on them. They kind of like put a little bow around them and said you were now whatever, conservative, Republican, libertarian. But they put them in the right wing camp, and a lot of those people were actually very confused. They're like, I've always been on the left. I've always voted Democrat. I'm a hardcore leftist. Whatever whatever they
Oh,
said, and they were very confused by it. But a lot of them said, okay, I guess I'm a right winger now. And I think it was a way to shift the Overton window. And this again is speculation, so nobody hold me to this. When I have a theory, I'll let you know it's a theory. But my theory is that actually I think that the Knights of Malta were behind it because
oh, let's
the
go.
the Knights of Malta actually started as the Knights of Hospitalier, and even today their exoteric veneer is that they are a medical charity organization. And so I think, but they often operate through the, quote unquote, wing political because they're tied to like militaristic orders. So typically the different various occults, at least I look at it from, kind of the left tends to be more divine feminine. And they operate through, they're very emotionally charged. It's more about worshiping like Mother Earth, Gaia, religion, and then the right wing tends to be, there was that whole authoritarian test, right? And so it tends to be more paternal, patriarchal, more authoritarian, disciplinarian, and militaristic. And so they tend to operate that way. That's a part of their how they infiltrate. From what I've seen, and the Knights of Malta, that it would follow. So, that is my theory. Again, I haven't found like I don't think I'm ever going to find the smoking gun to prove that,
Yeah.
but it would make sense. And I think they're always shifting the Overton window. What do we see today? Today we see, people who a year ago on the quote unquote right wing who would have never bought an electric vehicle because they didn't buy into the climate narrative. And what are we seeing now that Elon works for the Trump administration? The people are rushing out to buy Teslas, cheering these electric vehicles. Like, what
Yeah.
happened to you? So here we go again. The Overton window shifts.
It's so wild, especially because Elon was the hero for buying for propagating electric vehicles, and now the left is like going back and buying gas guzzling SUVs as a rebellion against Elon. It's like, okay, fine. Let's just look at this for a second. Okay, you don't
Uh,
like Elon, but didn't you just spend the past 30 years saying how much gas and climate change and all that? And so you're going to abandon all of your principles that you've been pushing from an inconvenient truth onward, basically, and
yep,
and do this out of hatred for Elon Musk? Like,
of
do
course.
you have any core at all? Is there anyone home? It's baffling to me.
It's all identity politics. It's all cult of personality. I just tweeted this actually, but right before we got on, I just wish people would spend like a fraction of the time they do, worshiping or vilifying cult of personality, engaging in actual ideas. If they just spent like a fraction of the time engaging in the ideas themselves, like I don't care about the people. Most of the time, we don't know the people. Most of the time, people are, worshiping or vilifying people they've never met based on some online persona. It's a persona, right? There's a reason it's persona, not their personality, not their character, it's persona. So, this is a facade that you are seeing that has been marketed to you strategically, by the way.
Mhm.
And I think people are just so deracinated from themselves, sense of self, that they start to they want to feel a sense of belonging, and they anchor to things, and so they're really easily swayed and pushed into these various cults, and yeah, it's very frustrating to watch.
I'm so glad that you see that because coming from the manosphere, that's exactly what I saw was
Yeah,
small little mini cults of personality. You know,
yeah,
we and our little cult of personality in this particular topic around masculinity, we have the
right,
secret knowledge and
right,
follow me for more secret knowledge and only I will tell you what to do and don't listen to that other guy who's saying the exact same thing in a different way and
right,
men paying to get closer to the guru
yep,
and like and understanding that the masses who were involved in this, they weren't engaging with ideas. They couldn't pop out of the little circle. They would just it would be team versus team of man versus man. And I was
yep,
like, what are we doing? And then I see it now on such a larger
Yeah.
level. It's especially from people who self-identify as intellectuals, or I'm informed and I'm going to rally behind my guy and you rally behind. Like, stop it, quit it.
I think so few people actually read anything today.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I think and we live in a soundbite culture, and so but here's the thing, reading is part of how people create inner monologues. I've recently learned that apparently a large percentage of population actually doesn't have an inner monologue,
I
which is
know
terrifying. They're
it doesn't make any
literally
sense.
entities, like, literally. Because I mean, that's how you can program somebody so easily if they don't have an internal monologue. But I think that part of, identity is your thought processes. And it's so intrinsic to being human that people do crave it, even though that so few do it these days. And reading is part of how you develop that internal monologue and how you develop that thought process, that process of thinking. That is just, it's like essential to
Mhm.
being human, I think, and consciousness and developing your consciousness. So I think that what's happened is because people don't spend time doing that, but yet they crave it. They get a little taste of it from these pop intellectuals, and then they think they've done the thinking themselves. So what happens is it becomes voyeurism, voyeuristic intellectualism. So it's almost like like when you watch a movie or a play or listen to, a piece of any kind of art form, really. I mean, it had the power to, effectuate change on a cellular level. But what it also does, and part of the reason it's so powerful, and this is part of why it's powerful for propaganda, is because when you watch it, people will allow themselves to have an emotional experience that they might not be able to access otherwise. So, like we'll just take the kind of stereotype, like the manosphere, a very macho kind of guy who would
Mm.
never allow himself to cry in public, maybe never allows himself to cry at all, even in front of his family but goes see some sort of a, really tearjerker movie and then like starts bawling. And that's so cathartic, right? Because even the really macho guy has emotions and sometimes just needs that release. And so, that's the power of, an art form. But now we're seeing this through intellectual lectures, even the podcast sphere. And people think they've actually done the thinking themselves, but they've heard somebody often just bloviate for a very long time. And they think that they've engaged in this really deep intellectual thought processes, but they haven't worked anything out for themselves. It's been voyeuristic. And I think that's a huge part of the problem. And so now people end up responding and reacting to that because it was so emotional for them that they align and they identify with that experience, but without having developed their own inner monologue about the ideas themselves.
Hmm. Very well said. Very well said. And as a podcast host myself, I hope that I encourage my listeners to go read books for yourselves. Think about these issues for yourselves, and please don't let me do the thinking for you. But it's really important, and I will often get into arguments with people over audiobooks, and people get super worked up over this when I say that audiobooks are not the same as reading.
They're
What do
not.
you mean? I have to do this when I do this? Like, no, no, no. Sit down, pick up a real book for exactly the reason that you describe, is that to sit down and read a physical print book, not a Kindle. I don't necessarily have a problem with Kindles, but I think there's something very different about a physical print book. Sit down, especially because it's not doing backlight in your eyes, but sit down and reading that, and that helps you develop the inner monologue, think about things at your own pace. You're not just passively allowing words to
Exactly.
wash over
Exactly.
you. And people get really upset when I say that, but like the way that you learn to think for yourself is you have to chew on very substantial material inside your own head. And that
Yeah.
forces you to think as opposed to letting the narrator do the thinking for you.
Exactly. I mean, it's a muscle like anything else. I mean, you have to use it or you lose it. And, I think there's a time and a place for an audiobook.
Of
Not, I
course.
mean, we live in a very busy world. And, I think it's better than nothing. If you're able to if you do
Yes.
long drives or you're a manual laborer, I mean, I know a lot of like truck drivers are some of the most like awake and knowledgeable people because they listen to books and podcasts all
Yes,
day.
of course.
So, it definitely has a time and a place, but there is something very different about actively engaging with the visual written material. And I mean, it goes even further. If you take notes or you highlight or even I put sticky marks,
Mhm,
but now you're engaging with the material. It's no longer just being fed to you.
mhm.
And I think that's the problem. We live in a world where so few people are able to formulate their own ideas and opinions because they've been spoon fed. And oftentimes, when things are spoon fed, sometimes it's not even intentional, right? It's just you're going to be. You're taking in the inherent bias that might not even be intentionally, malignant.
Mhm.
But of course, it's also uh, a very, very great tool for propaganda. So,
Yeah. I mean, you have to today, we all have to protect our cognitive abilities.
yeah,
It's very easy to get in the hypnotrance of a TV show or a movie or a podcast or, social media, right? I think there's so much in our environment that wants to literally entrance us. It's like put us in a trance, lull us into passivity. And as video games, right? I don't think that that's inherently bad in and of itself. I think
right,
escapism, entertainment, all of these things are fine. But when it
sure,
becomes your default way of life, and then when you throw in artificial intelligence or large language models to do a lot of the thinking for us, or I'm
yeah,
not going to read this book, I'm just going to have AI give me a digest of it, that muscle starts to get very weak. And it's so ironic that we're talking in an age where you have like RFK Jr. and, and the Department of Health and Human Services, I think, being so fit and working out. And it's like at the same time, where people are focusing on the gym, they're not working out in the mental gym as hard as they used to. I don't know what to make
yeah.
about that, but
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the AI is a huge, huge problem. So I think it can be a tool. The
yes,
tool inherently is not evil.
absolutely.
But my biggest concern is with children who are growing up with this. So, like you were saying, outsourcing your cognitive faculties to the AI. Now you're trusting the AI to do it for you. I think, it's like the old adage you have to know the rules before you can break them.
Mhm.
So, if you have already developed your cognition and you use it as a tool, I think it can actually be a very helpful tool.
Yes, agreed.
um, and I think it is inevitable. Unfortunately, this is the age we're in. They're going to advance this AI. It is already doubling like per month. Every 3 months, it's doubling in its capacity and speed, and it's kind of insane. It's a little mind blowing, and I mean, kind of exciting and kind of terrifying. All those things wrapped into one. But my concern is how much of it is being utilized in the schools, and the children don't have fully developed frontal lobes. They're first learning how to develop their own critical thinking skills, and they're already outsourcing all of that. So it's like being given a calculator before you've learned how to do basic arithmetic. Most of us have very significantly deteriorated our math skills thanks to the calculator.
Yeah.
I'm speaking for myself there. Yeah. So I've outsourced a lot of that, and I'm very aware of it. But we make choices, and as an adult, I think that's fine to do, but I learned how to do, and I was actually very good at math when I was little, but so at least I had that foundational development. And I think that's so important for us to recognize. I think for parents to understand that. And, it's not for me to tell people what to do. It's just to have that awareness when you're thinking about what's best for your children. And my personal opinion, I think giving them the technology and those tools before they develop their own is potentially very pernicious.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. I have a, Christian audience, and homeschoolers are a big part of that, and I think homeschooling is probably one of the most important things that awake and aware parents of any faith background really can do I think because that gives them the opportunity to say, "Hey, child, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna dumb this down for you. Like, I'm gonna give you this problem, and you're gonna have to work your way through it without the use of aids that other kids will have." And yes, of course, it's difficult, and but you run that forward a number of years, and you have kids who can think, not just
Right.
think for themselves, but they can think. Period. They can reason. They can do math. They can digest complex ideas in books. And I don't know actually what that does to humanity. This is a question that had heard someone articulate a couple years ago, maybe, that when you have this big split coming where you have families that are going towards a more natural, holistic health, homeschooling, filtered water, you name it, right? And they're
Right.
raising their kids with this, no jabs, et cetera. They're raising their kids with this. And then you have the call them the normie population, who are, consuming factory-made food and public school and screens, especially screens for young kids. And the cognitive impact of that on a young child who gets addicted to a screen at 3 or 5 years old, I don't think we can measure the devastation from that child's potential. But when you have those 2 paths, and there's really kind of only 2 of them, or they're certainly diverging, how do you avoid creating a two-tier society where you just have one generation of kids that are just so much more capable than their cohort? And COVID began that, where you had many kids who was it language was so drastically impacted by kids
Mhm.
that went to online learning. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
know what we do about that, but
Just the
that
math alone. Yeah.
yeah,
Great
exactly.
technique. Yeah. Well, I think that there's a lot to unpack in that,
Yes,
because what's going on with I don't know how familiar you are with the work I've done on the, school choice issue. I think I've done, like,
not.
literally oh, okay, I've done over 30 shows on it, maybe more. I've lost count at this point. I've battled in my own state. There are 2 topics that happen to be my governor's, like, pet, projects. And apparently, those are the 2 I've been a thorn in his side, so I don't think I'm their favorite person, but his 2 pet projects are this school choice initiative,
Mhm.
which is a very long agenda, and then the conservation easements. So the conservation easements, were a part of this, bigger agenda, which was the natural asset companies. I did like I called it an emergency broadcast. I actually had a whole show prepared for my radio show, and then I like dropped all of it. I said, I have to do this. This is like, if I'm going to do a radio show, it has to be something, this is too important to let go.
Right.
So the natural asset companies, they did get rescinded. They withdrew the proposal, but they've just renamed it. It's now being called the Sustained Act. They're not going to let that agenda go because they think they're going to make upwards of $5 quadrillion on this.
I'm sorry,
So
$5 quadrillion?
I know, it's a number you can't fathom, nobody can. So, um, that yeah, you might as well just say infinite. It's just
Right.
infinity amount of dollars, yeah. They wanna quantify, like, the air we breathe, the, water we
Oh,
drink, everything, yeah. So this is all gonna be done through, carbon sequestration and, the carbon taxing and, offsets, carbon offsets. This is all under the climate lie, which it really is a lie. They've admitted it. I have it in my the preview of my book, The Hegel's Dialectic, a Gnostic Jacob's Ladder, and a Machinery of Control. The preview is up on my Substack, and yeah, I'm going to be pausing from some recording. I'll still be uploading episodes next month, but I'm going to try and get this book finished so I can put out the pre-order and publish it. But I have several more chapters outlined that I'll, finish it up. But right now I have a preview up on my Substack, and in there I have the quote from the Club of Rome in their Global Revolution document, which was 1992, saying that their Limits to Growth document, which was 20 years earlier, I'll probably even find it for you, but in 20 years earlier, they said that they needed to find a common enemy for man to rally behind. And so they decided it was like, the fact that we pollute all the air and the water, and, we are the problem essentially. That's why we're the carbon they want to reduce. And they essentially said that the enemy, if they found a common enemy, they could get everybody on board with this narrative. And what did they decide the common enemy is? They say, like, the enemy of humanity is man himself. It said this is why we're the carbon they want to reduce. So they've admitted that this is a complete lie and it's a farce, but it is a great narrative. It's very compelling for especially people who are very susceptible to more emotional kind of manipulation and want to be perceived as compassionate.
mhm,
This is what I call the compassion trap. This is where they weaponize compassion, which I think is they're exploiting what I think are one of the best attributes of human nature,
mhm,
and weaponizing it against humans themselves. But this is also, is also part of how identity politics works, right? Because you think about compassion typically as being a more feminine trait. Not to say that men aren't compassionate, they definitely are, obviously. But you think of it as being a more feminine trait. Why? This is biological because women need to be attuned to their offspring. They have to have compassion, for their offspring. Compassion is derived, and I talk about this in the book as well, the origins of the word empathy and how empathy is the first stage of compassion, right? This idea of being able to, you know, feel somebody else's feelings without having the direct experience. So it's not sympathy, it's being able to relate to it.
Mhm.
But compassion takes it a step further and now says that you want to alleviate that person's suffering. And so, of course, that's what you'd want to do for your offspring. But what happens now if you are a threat to that woman's offspring? They're not compassionate to you. They become vicious mama bears. And
Mhm.
that is what we see with all of these group identity politics, right? You have these, Gnostic elect leaders who are, defending their group, and then the groups start fighting against each other. And this is much more effective because it's much easier to get groups to fight against each other than to get individuals. Again, when you're looking at somebody in the eye and you see their humanity, it's much harder. Not to say that people don't fight, one on one. They do, but it's much easier to get groups to, create warring factions. So, but yeah, so they're using this narrative of the climate agenda to rally people behind this huge, what they think is going to be a huge money making um, yeah, to commodify the air we breathe. So it was the SEC who partnered with the IEG, which is the Intrinsic Exchange Group, to put a proposal up on the New York Stock Exchange to create a new classification of companies called natural asset companies. And part of that would have been the part of the vehicle to be able to usurp the land. It's part of a 30 by 30 agenda, which Biden renamed the America the Beautiful because, that sounds much nicer.
Of course.
And so but through the conservation easements, they have something called ecosystem management services, which you would be able to. They would outsource the control over the land that you actually own. And so, all this to say, in my state, that was a big initiative. These conservation easements, and my. Governor was very much on board with these and still pushing them today. I had one of the legislators who brought me in to do a presentation to the legislators, and he blames me for being kicked out. He said that it was very effective. They were pushing back. And I told him that that was not my goal. And I felt terrible about it. And I thought he was kind of kidding at first, but I was his second guest on his podcast. He actually brought it up twice in the podcast saying that I was the reason that he was voted out. So it's that one. And then the school choice issue. And the school choice issue is, of course, this is a long running agenda. This goes all the way back several decades. I would actually argue it's about, it's over a century old with the St. Louis Hegelians and the, Prussian model of education that was exported to the United States after the Battle of Jena in 1807. They lost the battle and they decided they lost the battles because the soldiers rebelled because they were critical thinkers. And so they had to create a system that bred for compliance and obedience and, bred out all the critical thinkers.
Mm.
And so that is what they have been working very diligently to deliberately dumb down America. But Charlotte Iserbyt was a whistleblower under the Reagan administration on the BEST project. And the BEST project was tied to exactly what we were talking about earlier with all the tech ed. Right. And so she was kind of blowing the whistle on all of that. Her father and her grandfather were both members of Skull and Bones. I think she got away with a little bit more in terms of her whistleblowing than she might have otherwise. But she also had all the receipts, and she was very instrumental in helping Anthony Sutton with his research on how the order controls education. She gave him like the actual black book kind of logs. And so this agenda has been in the works for so long, and through her books, and I recommend people getting the unabridged. It's very long, very thick, huge book, "The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America," along with John Taylor Gatto, who was
Mhm.
very vocal against compulsory education. I think he's absolutely right. There's nothing in the Constitution that stipulates compulsory education. Our founding fathers did not have formal education, most of them, and I would argue most of them were far more erudite than people we see in higher education today. So that's my own opinion, and yeah, I don't think it was very favorable when I said that. So, but I think it's kind of true. But yeah, in her book, she goes through how they were going to push this school choice narrative through the political right, and that's where they would get it done. And I think that's what we're obviously seeing that today. I mean, Trump has now. National. He's advocating for it nationally, which is blatantly unconstitutional.
The school choice program sounds like a euphemism for not having maybe for not having a choice. So maybe you can unpack the school choice program for
Yeah,
those who haven't
yeah,
heard of it.
it's a very clever marketing. I always say we should all have their marketing team because we
Yeah.
would be so successful. We'd have these great brands. I want like the marketing team for the UN, um, personally. But yeah, I don't know what you have to sign to get that, so maybe I don't want it. But I'm just saying they're pretty good at
It's
it. So
expensive. It's pretty
yeah,
expensive.
yeah. But yeah, choice. Who can argue against choice?
Right.
It sounds wonderful, but it's government choice. And now I fell for it when I was in sixth grade. I actually created a board to start school choice because I went to a very small, I grew up in a very small town that didn't have its own high school. And so the town next to me had a high school, but it was not, the school was not a quality school in any regard. Like it wasn't safe, it wasn't a good education. And I had friends who went to these other schools that were actually in closer proximity geographically. And so I didn't understand. I was 12 years old. I kept saying to my parents, why can't I just go to one of those schools? That doesn't make sense. And so I started a board to, advocate for school choice. And 6 years later, they implemented it. I, of course, knew nothing about the long range agenda at the time. And I thought this was just, why can't my parents decide where I go to school? If it's the same distance, they should have some sort of a voucher. They're paying taxes. This makes sense. But I had no idea that this is really an agenda to put every school under government control. That is to make all schools government run. This is a execution of really Alice Bailey's plan that she lays out in her book Education in the New Age. This was the inspiration for Robert Mueller, who was for 40 years worked for the UN. He was Secretary General of the UN, and he wrote his 2,000 ideas. I think it became 4,000 ideas. He fancied himself quite the visionary.
I guess
Um,
so.
yes, he studied under Hugh Thant, who was a direct disciple of Teilhard de Chardin, and he very much, wanted to execute those visions of helping to create this noosphere. The education system that he designed was called the World Core Curriculum, and this was directly predicated on the works of Alice Bailey, who was a disciple of Madame Blavatsky, who was one of the original members of the Theosophical Society, and she was the founder of Lucius Trust, which of course, arcane schools, the Goodwill servers, yeah, and triangles. And this is Lucius Trust is a direct consultancy of the UN to this day. It was originally called Lucifer Publishing.
Yep.
Also, Madame Blavatsky had a magazine called Lucifer Magazine as well. So, it gives you a little indication of where their views were. But yeah, she had laid out in her Education New Age what the plans for education would be to create planetics, which is what Robert Mueller outlines in his 2,000 ideas. He keeps talking about, I think it ended up being 4,000, but I don't remember. It was a lot of ideas, and it's pretty long. But I think it started as 2,000. And he says the word planetics over and over again. And this is predicated on Alice Bailey's vision. So he creates the World Core Curriculum, which is designed to create global citizens. And then, of course, from there, the United States developed what is called Common Core, and Charlotte Iserbyt calls it Communist Core. I think it's much more aptly put. Um, but yeah, this is the vision, to execute that in the United States. And what we're seeing now with, of course, CASEL, SEL, under the Fetzer Institute, all the social emotional learning stuff and all the tech ed stuff. This is all just carrying out literally Bailey's plan to create a one world religion and a one world governance.
I literally just heard about social emotional learning and the roots of that like 2 weeks ago, and someone sent me a
Oh, really?
Substack article because, I spent 20 years in the New Age, so they're talking about John Kabat-Zinn and Thich Nhat Hanh and all this. I'm like, this is the foundations of it's explicit. These are the
Oh, yeah.
foundations of social emotional learning, like Buddhism,
Mhm.
Eastern mysticism is in their own writings the foundation of this thing. I was like, Wait, what?"
So if I were, an Eastern mysticist, I'd be very upset with the New Agers
Sure.
and the Theosophists. No, I would because they butchered it. They cherry pick. So it's a syncretic religion. right?
Yeah.
Although they say it's not a religion, they say it's a perennial philosophy. Aldous Huxley has a book on the perennial philosophy. That's what Madame Blavatsky herself says. But what they do is they take elements that are that advance their agenda and their vision, and they create a theosophical soup. And really, it's a revamped kind of rebranding of Neoplatonism. I think is really a good way to look at it. But they incorporate a lot of aspects of Buddhism and Hinduism, but it's not, it doesn't maintain the integrity of either one of those. And that's not meant for me to tell people, oh, they should be a Buddhist or a Hindu. It's just, if I
Right.
were like a Hindu or a Buddhist, I'd actually be very offended because they've appropriated. Like that's actually what they've done.
Yes.
Because it's syncretic. It's not authentic.
Correct. Yeah. No, the New Age harvests. I have a
Mhm.
big 2-hour presentation, 2.5-hour presentation I did about this start of 2023 that I should probably do
Okay.
more with. But they harvest teachings out of various world traditions and syncretize them into this big antichrist religion. I mean, like that's really what it is because it
Yeah.
expels biblical Christianity. It has to. You can't digest it. And so, what it does is, and then it hyper commercializes it. And so this
Yeah.
began, in the 1960s, the 1970s with the hippie generation, and then the 80s and the 90s, it became what we know recognize as the New Age, paired with personal development and massive expenditures of money to create inner peace and financial fulfillment, etc. It's just essentially a prosperity gospel using your mind as a tool for manifesting it, and it's very seductive, and it seems like it's globalist in nature. And oh, but look, we've got some Buddhism stuff, and we've got some Native American stuff, and aren't we so progressive? And it's like you just end up getting lost in a swamp. And that would be
Yeah.
bad enough, except for the influences that you just talked about of where this has fed into politics, economics, culture, education, geopolitics. Like, and I don't think people recognize the gravity of just how significant the new age, and it's not even a great term, but how significant this theosophical influence has been on world and American culture today.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I said, I mean, the new age is kind of the rebranding, and a lot of that came out of this was, as you said, it was like the 70s, 80s, and that a lot of that came from Stanford Research Institute. They did the Changing Images of Man document. So this was
Oh,
like a
oh no.
uh,
I haven't heard of
yeah,
this.
like Lewis Harmon and who else was involved? Based on Joseph Campbell,
Mhm.
and so and Harmon was the president of the Noetics, the IONS, right, Institute for Noetic Sciences for 2 decades, and so Willis Harmon and W. O. Markley, who did a lot of work on like remote viewing, and so then of course CIA did their Project Stargate,
Mhm.
but they did this Changing Images Man document, and it was a very long. I actually had the printout of it because to buy the book, this is another one of those really expensive books. So
Mhm.
I don't have that kind of budget. If anybody wants to support, by all means. But yeah, so it's very expensive, but that you can get the PDF online. And this is where they were doing these studies about changing the image of man. So man's perception of man's self.
Mhm.
So essentially changing the consciousness of man. And they popularized those ideas in a book called The Aquarian Conspiracy. Willis
Yes.
Harman's secretary was Marilyn Ferguson,
Okay.
and he used her name as a pseudonym for this book to popularize the ideas. And so but then really what we have now is the New Thought movement. And the New Thought movement is just another iteration of the New Age, but with a stronger focus on mentalism, which is the first principle of Hermeticism. So, I mean, all of this really does go back to the ancient mystery schools. And now we've got, and I just did a video on this, and I really wish more people would kind of pay attention to it. I know this is one of the problems. Like, I've always been kind of Cassandra. So, nobody really likes Cassandra, and nobody really pays attention to Cassandra. But I did a video and I was so exhausted. So I know it was not my most eloquent work, and I will definitely do a write up on it, but I have
Mhm.
not had time yet. But on the Hegelian dialectic between Game B and the Dark Enlightenment, because this is really what I perceive as how, especially in the West, they're trying to foment the technological immanentization of the eschaton. so we
Okay.
can advance towards the singularity.
Yep.
And they're both movements are really predicated on various elements of these ancient mysteries. So they just have different flavors. So, whether it's chocolate or vanilla, they're still both ice cream, and they're both still part of the dialectical churn that is spiraling us towards the singularity. The omega point is singularity,
Mm.
and creating the noosphere. They're doing it. They have different visions of how to get there, but ultimately, that's what both of them are doing, and they are both very much so. Of course, the Game B movement, a lot of them are more theosophical in their rhetoric.
Mhm.
There was a split between that movement where, and Jim Rutt talks about this often, where some of the them were a little too woo woo, was his words, and then others were more kind of hard scientists. They were systems theorists. They were complexity theorists. He was at the Santa Fe Institute chairman for over 10 years, and so. Um, he said that's what he said, but they did come back together, and regroup. And so they speak in more theosophical language, or at least, appealing to I call it really like they're the leftist of this technological imagization of the eschaton. And then we've got the dark enlightenment who are operating through the right as a vehicle. And of course, we see this is like the Elon Musk and the Peter Thiel and
Mhm.
that crew. But ultimately, they're using principles of this ancient mystery religion. And the cosmoerotic humanists, who a lot of them are tied in with this Game B stuff, and you can find cosmoerotic humanism. It's first values, first principles on evolving perennialism,
Mhm.
and the 42 propositions on cosmoerotic humanism. And you can find this at theofficeofthefuture.com, because, the best way to predict the future is to plan it.
Mhm.
And so, of course, they are futurists. And this is David Temple. And I've now learned that it was a homage to him. But the three of them, they used him as a pen name, but the three of them comprise of David Temple. He wasn't actually involved. It's Mark Gaffney, Zach Stein, who was just inducted to Club of Rome last year, and Kenneth Wilber, of course, the integralist,
Mhm.
who based his whole theory of altitudes on Claire Graves' spiral dynamics and the chakra system. And I did a whole thread on that. But they're but they talk about this also, right? They're constantly talking about, like, even Mark Gaffney is doing his literally reviving the mystery school. He has a whole Eros mystery school, he calls it. He says that Eros is not about sex. It's a radical love affair with the universe. But of course, what did we have? Eros and Eros and Thanatos. This was
Mm.
Freud. And then we have Eros and Civilization. This is Herbert Marcuse.
Marcuse.
And yep, and now we've got Eros Mystery Schools, and he talks to R.B. Marcus, who is helping him promote this, and he says, "Yep," and he says, "Yeah, we have to revive the mysteries, and we have to, reinvigorate the ancient mystery." So yes, Eros Mystery Schools. So it all goes back, and so it really is. I mean, when people say it's a spiritual battle, I don't think they've realized there's really, regardless of someone's worldview, there is actually an intellectual battle that's operating through, it's epistemological, that is
Mhm.
operating through this spiritual battle.
Yes.
And ultimately, the reason I call it a technological immunization of the eschaton is because where I see it going is that there are the people who acknowledge that regardless of your belief system, they acknowledge that there is a divine benevolent creator, that we are not that, and that he has endowed us with this beautiful gift of free will. And free will is not an end. Free will is a vehicle. It's a conduit. It allows us the potential for virtue and morality, that we have to exercise it. And then there are the people who want to, they want to obtain radical freedom, and radical freedom is an end. And this is, very much revealed in, I think, in like Crowleyan Thelema, do what thou wilt, or Nietzschean will to power. This is where we see these types of ideas manifest, this kind of radical free will. But it's very confusing to people, because people hear freedom and they think that you're talking about free will, but they're not the same, at least from what I can discern. And so you've got this kind of battle, and then you've got the people who, they operate their lives, they live in the hopes that they will exercise their free will, and that their moral, they will attain some sort of virtue, morality that will grant them entrance to heaven, right? Whatever their beliefs are, but that they will, that heaven is not here on earth. At least we can all, at least they agree on that much. And then there are people who want to bring heaven on earth, and they can't do that in any means except for synthetic. And this is why we are now seeing these, transhuman agendas, the biodigital convergence, the technocracy that they're trying to foment and ultimately achieve a singularity, which, then you will have this freedom, the liberation, but it is a liberation of the collective. It is not individual freedom. It is a collective ends where they become co-creators. So essentially they become God.
Hmm. I hope everyone can hear what I'm talking about when I say that you've mastered this material, because I mean you just from my perspective, you just navigated through three or four completely disparate fields rather
Oh,
seamlessly to show the ways that they tie together. So we went from social emotional learning to cosmohumanism to cosmo erotic humanism, which I heard about from Aubrey Marcus and which infuriates me, and then you navigate from there into transhumanism. And the thing is, I think anyone standing in a particular position would look at these as being separate movements. Would say like, "Oh
mm,
my gosh, I look over here and I see the transhumanists, and I look over here and I see the new age romance hippies or whatever, and I look over here and I see psychedelics, and I look that way and I see school choice, right, or whatever, medical freedom." And the perspective is like, "Oh, these must all be separate, or not medical freedom. What is opposed to medical freedom? Medical tyranny, I suppose. These would all be
mm,
separate, but ultimately they're all faces of the same thing, and they're all
yes,
linked, and they have philosophical and, in a sense, theological and spiritual foundations
yep,
that they share. And it's different fronts in a war against humanity, to put them into a position of enslavement to a two-tier, ultimately it's kind of communist in a way, but even that doesn't quite capture it. It's a two-tier occultic esoteric communist society, right?
yes.
And you say that to people, or I say that to people, and they're like, whatever, but then it's like, hey, if you look at each individual one of these strands and you just start pulling, you'll see that they all tie together.
They all tie together. Yeah. I don't know, that's a I'm like a I'm a pattern recognizer, so it's
Mm,
very hard for me not to see dots connect.
sure.
I often have to work really hard to like check myself, like, okay, that might not be connected to that.
Yeah.
And this is why I do read the primary sources, because I know that I tend to see connection. That's just how my brain works. But unfortunately, it's like it doesn't matter which end I come in through. I'm like, wait, it is connected. And oftentimes even the people start to be connected. That's what I find. I mean, it's like I start diving into whether it be the education field, whether it's the medical stuff, whether it's the field of psychology,
Hmm.
which it's got esoteric roots, literally. It is born out of esotericism. You've got the whole trajectory of especially continental philosophy, but really all of Western philosophy. I mean, there are some exceptions, but yeah. And then the technology, the whole industry, all of these things are interwoven. That doesn't mean that there are never battles within. I want to be very
Of course.
clear about that. I absolutely believe there is free will, there's free agency. Humans can absolutely be disruptors. That's the reason I do what I do. Is I hope to inform, inspire, and empower people to exercise their free will, so that they can have the information, and then you never know who's going to be a disruptor and derail the plan. In fact, the UN is a great example of that, because they talk about, they did their Summit of the Future last year, and they kept saying how far behind their 2075 agenda that they are. And they
Praise
kept
God.
pointing, yeah, right. They kept pointing to the United States as the big thorn in their side, why they're so far behind. I'm like, yes, let's uh, let's keep going.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, in a sense, I have a book about this that's sitting on my shelf that I've been meaning to read. I think it's called "In Pursuit of the Metaverse," and I can't remember the name of the author, but Carl Teichgrib and I talked about it. I believe Carl, at least you know of his.
awesome. I
Yeah,
love him.
yeah, he's a great man, and so we talked about reading that together. But ultimately, all these different threads together point to the attempt to create a new Tower of Babel. I mean, that's
Yeah,
really what it
that's
is,
it.
like a totalizing view of how to control and all of humanity. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I don't like to have this conversation because most people don't have like the the historical and the full context to really engage with it. Like I almost will never even use the term Zionism because most people don't know that the origins was literally intended to create a dialectic. But when people talk about, they call it the Greater Israel Plan, I'm like, I actually think it's the Greater Babylonian agenda, which has nothing to do with Jews. Like nothing.
Right.
If anything, they want to eradicate Jews. And this was actually, I just posted a big thread on this with all the receipts from Alice Bailey herself, who talks about in order to create the one world religion, one of their big problems is the Jew. They have to get rid of traditional Judaism. And she uses the term Orthodox, but you have to understand that, in Greek, Orthodox means correct thinking. So she's really saying like the religious Jews. You have to get rid of them. They welcome, Madame Blavatsky says the same thing. She
Mhm.
says that she says both Christianity and Judaism are diametrically opposed to theosophy. And she
Mhm.
says that, really any monotheistic religion, so essentially Islam is as well, although they seem to be much more welcoming of that. The Islamic order is actually the largest voting bloc of the UN, who is very much advancing this theosophical agenda. But I think a lot of that has been subverted as well. There's been institutional capture from every angle possible. So
I
yeah,
really appreciate you saying that because obviously it's a topic that's up on X literally today, particularly in Christian circles, but I know it's larger than that. And Spencer Smith, I don't know if you've ever encountered any of his work. He did an excellent series of documentaries called Third Adam, just really substantial work. He's been on my podcast a couple times. Very,
okay.
very charismatic and distinctive guy. And he pointed out on X, I guess it would have been a couple months ago, he said the end result of every conspiracy awakening is a hatred for Israel. And when he posted that, I remembered my time in the New Age world and I got to thinking about the things that people were saying. And I realized that he was right. That he was right. But what I didn't realize, and what you just pointed out, is that this is actually in Alice Bailey's writings. And I was aware that Helena Blavatsky had called Christianity, and this is her words, quote, very pernicious to the
Yep.
aims of theosophy. She said the chiefs of the order regard Christianity as a very pernicious threat, meaning essentially our chief enemy in Christianity. But to hear that Alice Bailey also points out that Orthodox religious believing Jews need to be
Yeah.
eradicated as well validates Spencer Smith's
Like
point.
one of the first missions. Yeah.
Yeah, and so especially because the monotheistic religions, particularly embodied in sacred scripture, like this is the definitive text,
Yeah.
it can't be modified with any outside peripheral source. Like it can't. There's no special knowledge inherent in a priest class. That's what you need to undermine
Yeah.
scripture. But if you say, "Sorry, it's just all just in the book, and you just got to read the book," they hate that because then you don't have the Sarmoon Brotherhood as G.I. Gurdjieff was pursuing, or the chiefs of the Order of the Theosophical Society, or
Mm.
Jawal Kuhl, who I think was Alice Bailey's.
That was Alice Bailey's master. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Helped her write 24 books. Yeah. And Kutumi helped Madame Blavatsky. But yeah, the other problem that Alice Bailey talks about is, particularly with Judaism, is the separateness, and this is really the problem I think with all the
Oh,
monotheistic religions. Yeah, because this goes back to like the ancient Greeks. They would call it the undifferentiated all. Theosophists will say that we come from source, and that the mission of the human experience is to return back to source. Right? This is the divine spark. Everything is one. Um, this is and this is what they're trying to create with the membrane of the internet, right? I always show on my videos Bruce Lipton, the evolutionary leader.
hmm,
He talks. Right? Have you seen this? Where he of course uses the spiral because it's spiral dynamics, and he just like Hegelian dialectical spiral. But he talks about how we started off as amoeba, and amoeba's intelligence came from the membrane. This is where they collect information, and then we become multicellular organisms, and the reason they're more intelligent is because they have more membrane. And then humans, they're so complex. They have, so much surface area of membrane. That's why we're so intelligent, is what he said. And so he said, but now we have the opportunity to co create or go extinct. And he said we could co create the superorganism of humanity. And he
hmm.
said, what does he say is going to be the membrane of the superorganism of humanity? This is the internet, of course, right? So but when you talk about theosophy, or it's really, going back to what the ancient Greeks said with the undifferentiated all, that the one is better than the many. And so their whole goal is to, eviscerate any kind of boundaries or differentiation or distinction. To blend everything. This is why we have all the gender blending, and nobody can have their own religion. It's all part of one. It's a brotherhood, universal brotherhood, right? Everybody believes the same thing, or it's some mishmash of a bunch of things pushed together. But yeah, they don't want any distinctions because everything has to be part of the one. This is how we achieve the noosphere and the collective intelligence, which is the game B term, or the singularity essentially.
hmm Yeah, I don't think people really understand just what a powerful religion, whatever you want to call it, philosophy, theological system, the
Yeah,
all is one and all is God mindset is. Whether you're a pantheist, all is God, or panentheist, that all is inside God,
right.
that single idea is
Yeah,
what sets it up, as Dr. Peter Jones says, oneism it sets itself up in opposition to twoism, which is the Judeo-Christian tradition, literally the Judeo-Christian tradition as embodied in the Bible. In the
yeah,
beginning, God created, right? Like it is not of him. It's a completely separate thing created out of nothing, and that eternal separateness drives
yeah.
the theosophists nuts. And when you
Oh
have
yeah,
an objective transcendent standard that can't be harmonized or synthesized, they have to spit it out. And so that's why all the efforts to undermine, like literally, like the Judeo-Christian values in the sense of the best of the Jewish tradition as embodied in the Old Testament, and as well as faithful biblical Christianity, right? It's not for nothing that the Chicago World Parliament of Religions, I believe it was in 1893, where
18. Yeah,
Swami Vivekananda made his big famous his big Hindu debut. The one religion that was not represented there was Bible believing Protestant Christianity, right?
yep,
There's a reason for that, because it can't be syncretized into the whole. They're definitely
yep.
trying from outside the faith and from inside it as well, but
They are.
but that's
They're
the only place to stand.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they're having more success than perhaps would be nice to see. But yeah, it's it's definitely a challenge. Yeah, the World Parliament of Religions, which was revived a century later in
Yep.
1993, they now have like the ayahuasca religion is present there.
Don't get me
Uh,
started.
yeah.
Oh, I don't you probably don't know this, but I've done ayahuasca 15 times before coming to
Oh.
Christianity. So here on my on my left arm, this is an ayahuasca vine that I have tattooed on my left arm.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yes. I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting to go to war with these folks.
I got so much pushback for talking about, psychedelics,
Oh,
but
yes.
yeah. So, last year or the year before, but suddenly there was, like, this push everywhere. You were seeing, like,
Yeah.
mushrooms on children's clothing. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, like, furniture, mushroom furniture. Like, this is not fashion. I don't
Mhm.
know. This is so obviously propaganda. So I was trying to point this out to people, but what you also saw simultaneously was they started talking about how all of these articles and studies have been done on SSRIs, proving that they did not do what they had purported to do. In fact, the results were very much the opposite, that they actually cause things like suicidal ideation and depression and anxiety and all the things that they were claiming to, get rid of. So I'm careful not to use the C word, but they were, all the things they were claiming to do, they were actually doing the opposite. Okay. So all of these studies, the media was doing a huge blitz on this while
Mhm.
simultaneously pushing like all this fashion with mushrooms and talking about microdosing psilocybin and like why are they putting these studies out now? So first of all, these studies about the SSRIs, we knew this back in the 90s. Like
Mhm.
they had already proven in the 90s that the SSRIs cause suicidal ideation,
Mhm.
depression, anxiety, all the things that they're supposed to fix, they cause. We knew this back then. So, but suddenly this is news, and that's very strange to me. But now, what do they have? They have all this microdosing and this ketamine therapy that they're claiming is your new fix. And what do we also see simultaneously? We see people in the technocrat arena who are working on synthetic variations of these things. So we've
Mhm.
got Elon Musk with his ketamine. We've got Peter Thiel, but in the cannabis and the psilocybin. They're working on therapies, but they're synthetic. And so now big pharma is, or at least the technocrats, at least Silicon Valley, but I'm pretty sure big pharma as well, is involved in these new replacements for the SSRI therapies. But yeah, it feels like we needed Orwell's 1984 in order to usher in Huxley's Brave New World.
Right, and Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. I
Oh
think that
yeah,
that's an unappreciated
I agree.
masterpiece that shows, like, the big vid screens and the dumbing down and all of that, and the burning of books. Like, I think people, and very rightfully so, talk about Brave New World and Soma and that sort of proto-socialist
Love inner
wokeness.
servitude. Yes.
Yes, and but then you read Fahrenheit 451, it's like, "Oh, that's coming too." And you're absolutely right about psychedelics. I push back so hard on those, and what's coming, and first of all, RFK Jr., at least before the election, seemed like he was prepared to be the tip of the spear for normalizing psychedelics into American culture, because when he listed his top 10 or so priorities, didn't seem to be an ordered list. It was just in paragraph form. But the first thing that he listed was psychedelics. And
Mhm.
the pitch will be SSRIs, big pharma drugs have made people miserable, and there's all these studies that show just one psychedelic trip does what years of therapy can't. And so that will first be pushed on the veteran community, like, look at all these veterans that have been helped from their PTSD. That means everyone must do it all the time. And then when you see the legalization, particularly of like DMT and stuff like that in liberal states, it's crazy. And this is all coming, and I think it presents not only a medical challenge and a political challenge, but a theological challenge that I just don't know that people are prepared to answer. I don't know that they have an answer for, like, well, what's the theological response to trauma? Well, it's not taking drugs.
Well, and not only that, but if you look back at the ancient mystery religions,
Yeah.
what did they all do in order to create the transcendent experience, they either had some sort of a drug ritual that was usually psychedelic to create so that you could be one with the oneness, right?
Yeah.
Open up all the boundaries and, do away, dissolve all the boundaries, or some sort of trauma induction. And oftentimes, now I'm not denying that, nobody has ever had a good experience or benefited. There's always those exceptions. But oftentimes they go hand in hand. A lot of people have bad trips. A lot of
Yes.
people, not only do they experience that dissolution of all boundaries, but they actually have major traumatic events,
Yes.
or it brings up trauma for them.
Mhm.
So I think that but in the ancient mystery religions, most of the initiations involve this. So
Mhm.
it's part of the trauma bonding experience, and it's also part of trauma-based mind control. So
Mm. Yes. Yeah, I'm glad that you pointed that out, and it's very frequently that, psychedelics are paired with orgiastic rites. Like,
yes.
that's just a thing, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Like, that
Yes.
wasn't invented in the 1960s, and all
No.
of this stuff is being hyper normalized. And so right now you have this anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism that's having a brief resurgence, and I don't know ultimately how far it will go, especially because no one in the Trump administration agrees with it, so there's no doorways in for that. So I think it'll eventually run headlong into a brick wall, and then all the guys who are into that will fall off a cliff, and
I
that'll
hope
go.
so. I don't know about that. I think that
Okay.
the fact that yeah, I hope you're right. I
Yeah.
would like to nothing more than to be wrong on this, but
Mhm.
I think it's gonna create a dialectic.
Oh, please go
So
ahead.
now you're yeah, so I think you're gonna have that resistance, and people are going to argue that, it's creating kind of a favored kind of class, or and they're going to argue that it's creating more censorship. I'm already hearing these narratives, so they're really. I think the fact that they're pushing back on it, the Trump administration is actually creating this dialectical churn. I'm not. This is not saying that I think we should support anti-Semitism. I
Sure, of
obviously
course.
don't think that. Um, that is not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I do see a potential dialectical clash and a fomenting of some of these tensions. I'm concerned about it. I really hope it doesn't continue to escalate. But we're seeing it online. But I've actually experienced quite a bit of it, like in person. So it's yeah. So
Say
it's
more
not.
about that.
Um, Well, I mean, yeah, there's just I don't really know how to I know firsthand, let me not make it quite so personal, but and I
Right.
won't use names or anything, but, I know firsthand somebody I know's daughter, um, was bullied so bad they, like, beat her head,
Oh,
like, bashed her head, and she couldn't go back to school,
mhm.
and it was just because she was Jewish, like,
Oh,
nothing else, like, instigated at all. Um, I have, seen, people pull out weapons, like, just because somebody was Jewish. Yeah, I
oh, wow.
it's getting to the point where it's becoming so this is what I was talking about these, unfortunately, these algorithmic cybernetic feedback loops. We think that they're relegated to online, but what happens is a lot of people become one, you become a bit desensitized to what it would be like to have confrontation in person. You also, have a false sense of reality because you've been so myopically seeped in a silo, so
Mhm.
you think that that is a world and that is where everybody lives, but you're not seeing other people's silo. You're not seeing their
Yeah.
algorithmic feed. So you go out into the world and you engage, thinking that this is what how everybody's conducting. And so you've got a lot of people, and a lot of people are, the social skills have deteriorated a little
Mhm.
bit. Let me say that kind of a euphemistically.
Mhm. So that's very interesting because I think I think you're probably right. I mean, I definitely believe you. I don't mean to say that I don't.
Sure. Yeah.
In my circles, I'm seeing something else. I'm seeing like the fomenting of the racial tensions,
Oh,
right? So
that's true too.
that's
I'm
a,
not saying that's not.
oh my god, yeah. But that's a validation
Any
of your
way they
point,
can get people to fight against each other, they're happy. I
right?
always say that's what I always say. I say that, like in Christianity, there's a Trinity. I don't need to explain that to you or your
Hmm.
audience, obviously. But I always say that you can call the devil the opposition, whatever makes sense for you and your faith. But I always say the devil has a Trinity that he worships, and it's the triple D's. The devil, the triple D's,
Hmm.
and it is that the first one is deception, right? So distort, manipulate, deceive, right? He's master,
Hmm.
trickster, deceiver. And this is a way of convincing you of lies or, misrepresenting things. And then the second one is divide and conquer or divide and rule. And so this is, of course, the dialectical games. And so we see so much of this, all the division. And the more they can get people divided, and I think this is a huge part of why all the transgender stuff, I never focused too much on it because it's really a pipeline to transhumanism.
Mm.
But ultimately, the war between the men and the women, it's the biggest faction that you can get to fight
Yes.
against each other when they're supposed to be like simpatico. I mean, they were made for each other,
Hmm.
um, but you can get them fighting each other. And now you've got the two biggest groups fighting each other. So he's very happy with that. And then, of course, the last one is destruction. And I say this is why they're a death cult because they can only destroy, they can't create.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but I think the division is very key.
Hmm. Yeah. The scripture says the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but Christ has
Mhm.
come so that we might have life and have it abundantly, and so that to your point, like the enemy can only destroy things, can't actually create, and to see Christianity is having a trendy moment. I think the long term effects of that remain to be seen. I suppose I'm happier that people are exploring Christianity than not. Certainly, it's been a huge blessing in my life. But I think, again, to speak to another set of silos, another set of dialectics, you have the authoritarians that are beginning to wrap themselves in Christian language, and
Yes.
and for a political end, and not actually becoming regenerated believers, not actually becoming sanctified. And that's the thing. That's the thing that's just ripping apart my circles right now. Is you have brothers, like men, who are both, we'll call them both professing Christians, but one
Right.
is going in a hyper political, authoritarian, fascist direction, and in
Mhm.
many ways neo-Nazi, right? Going in that direction. And there's the other guys who are here like, hey, like that don't go that way. It's like, but we have to take America back from the evil. It's like, but like not like that. And that's again the dialectic that's being set up by these silos. Do you think, okay, so when you say cybernetic, do you
Mhm.
mean that is this algorithmic cybernetic? Is there some sort of consciousness behind this, or is just this they just plug in numbers into the machine and the machine is just generating its output?
Well, yeah, I think
Maybe
it's
both.
a code, right? So I think that it's when you say their consciousness, I mean humans program code, right?
Sure.
So right now we don't have robots doing code just yet. But even if robots do code, they're just an amplification of the original code.
Mhm.
So it still originates with the consciousness of that human who programmed it. So all of their biases and their worldview, that's going to be somehow embedded in it, and it gets amplified as it progresses, as the algorithm advances. So it's never without some sort of bias. But yeah, I think that I think that there's sentience? No. And I
Okay.
don't actually think that there will ever be. That's my personal belief. I think there's a lot invested in convincing people that there's sentience. I've seen the messaging already that
Mhm.
them saying that it's already been achieved. But I think that the effect of getting people to buy into that narrative could potentially be just as precarious as if they were to really create sentience. I think that it could actually have very similar, if not the same result.
Mm.
So I'm concerned about that, but I don't think that it will actually have achieve sentience. I think that comes from a soul. I don't think that they could create machines with souls. What they could do, though, is with the synthetic biology, they are creating things that can mimic humans and be
Yeah.
quite deceptive. And yeah, that
So
has its own set of concerns.
yeah, there was a whole like Peter Thiel, I don't remember the guy's name, but Peter Thiel was informed by a philosopher or thinker or technologist who
Well,
believes.
he was very influenced by Curtis Yarvin,
Yeah.
but he was also very influenced by Strauss. Right, he did his whole Straussian moment. Um, who was actually a lot of it was talking about Schmidt, uh, but yeah, he's in. They're also influenced by Heidegger. So a lot of philosophers who have a very kind of a Gnostic worldview. Heidegger was an existentialist,
Mhm.
and I get a lot of pushback when I say it's Gnostic. When I use the term, I'm not referring to the first century heretics of Christianity. I use the umbrella little g Gnosticism
Mhm.
to incorporate a lot of these, like the Hermetic and alchemical types of worldviews. But essentially, they're buying into this narrative of being trapped. Here on Earth by a ignorant demiurge who has withheld knowledge from us, right? So Gnostic, the term comes from gnosis. Gnosis in Greek is knowledge, right? So it's the divine knowledge, and this is also theosophy has the same kind of. They believe through theurgy, which is the divine work, that they can achieve the gnosis and then become God. This is a common theme through all of these, and so that's. Yeah, that seems to be, but again, it's couched in a lot of Christianese, is what I call it. Just like theosophy, when they talk about Christ consciousness,
Yeah.
very deceptive. A lot of Christians think that they're speaking their language. They say the Christ is returning, but they're very careful to say the Christ, and Christ, it's not Jesus Christ. They're very clear about that. This is a world teacher. This is Lord Maitreya,
Mhm.
who's no different than Krishna or Buddha. This is a world teacher that they believe is going to return. You could say, some would say it's the Antichrist, not, they say the Christ. I think there's a lot of evidence to indicate that that's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
There's a prayer that they do. You can find this on the Lucius Trust website. And at the end of it, they talk about to seal the door where evil dwells. And I'm like, wait, which side? Where are we going here?
Right.
They don't specify. So they speak in esoteric language. They're very clear about that. That's what their arcane school is all about. Blavatsky and Bailey talk about how this is specifically material for those who are spiritually evolved and familiar with the esoteric. And I think that that's what a lot of philosophers did as well. So my thesis for the book is Hegel's dialectic and Gnostic Jacob's ladder. Is that he talks about the rational absolute. And this sounds scientific, right? It's rational, logical, but he makes it very clear that rational is synonymous with speculative. And of course, I'm interpreting in English. I don't read German, so
Sure.
those who speak German can correct me if you wish. But he says that speculative is no different than mystical. So I do believe that he's speaking in Aesopian alien language, which is signaling to those who are initiated to understand that this is a blueprint. That's why I call it a machinery of control. And he just used him as an example because he very much influenced, Curtis Yarvin and the Dark Enlightenment and a lot of these thinkers that we're seeing through some of the quote unquote right wing technocratic arm. But um, so Hegel talks about this. Sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. Where was I going?
You're talking about Curtis Yarvin. We started out talking about Peter Thiel and Dark Enlightenment, and sort of some of the. I was You're absolutely right that he's been influenced by all of those, and I was going to mention also that there is a thinker who had influenced Peter Thiel that was talking about how through we can meme the singularity into existence, that by gathering collective consciousness in a particular direction, like you get everyone anticipating the arrival of the singularity, that will summon the singularity into existence. And that we're actually watching is something that is propagating like backwards in time, like our conscious intention in this moment will alter the past to make the singularity possible in a supposed future.
Are we talking about Ray Kurzweil? I mean, I don't.
No,
Sound.
it's not. It's someone else, but it's in that same vein. This idea, gosh, it's not, and it's not Rene Girard either. It was some other thinker that I'd never heard of before. But the idea being that yes, there are all these many thinkers you listed that definitely influenced Peter Thiel, but one of them
Yeah.
also that through our conscious intention in this moment, we can summon the singularity into existence to deliver us from what this whatever is going on in the world that they want to control, let's say.
Oh, I feel like I'm gonna have to find out who said this and
Oh,
look
I'm
this up.
sending Courtney Turner down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, definitely. I'm like, who said that? Um, yeah, I'm like trying to find it, but I don't know that I'm gonna find it that quickly.
Right. I wish I could
But
remember
yeah.
his name.
Uh, oh no, stream of consciousness. That's not right. Okay, well, I will look into that. But yeah, so all of them were kind of influenced by the same line of thought, and yeah, so Hegel himself talks about how it is, mystical, and so I
Mhm.
think he really was signaling to the initiated. Oh, this is what I was going to say. So he said that he rejected both Kant and Plato's notion of dialectic because it was too abstract. Too intellectual. He wanted a methodology for advancing the historicity of man. So essentially, he wanted like a tool,
Mhm.
and he pretty much says that, and that's pretty much what he codified. Not say that he was the first. I mean, we see this kind of unity of opposites through. And I lay that out in the book through lots of these ancient religions before him. But I think they paved the way for what he really cemented, and I think that has become really a tool for social engineering and empire.
What if it really were true that more than some sort of occult new age pagan awakening, which I think everyone can see very clearly, what's underlying our political moment is so much more, I guess, occultic, pantheist, antichrist in nature than people can recognize. Like here at the top of the iceberg, we're looking at all these. We're here. We are in Antarctica. We just woke up in Antarctica, and we're seeing all these the tips of the iceberg floating around. Like, oh, isn't this nice? Like, but then underneath it, it's a giant world that is ultimately at the deepest levels interconnected. And I think surfacing in a way that, like, I don't know, all my premillennial listeners are probably really like, exactly. So we see it all happening around us.
Yeah, I think we do see it happening all around us. I mean, it's definitely much more in your face than it ever was, right? I mean, even when you look through, since we brought up like Peter Thiel, and they're very much influenced by the accelerationists, and this
Mhm.
was this was born out of like the cybernetic cult research unit and cybernetic something, it's CCRU. But Nick Land was one of the prominent thinkers on this, and I mean, they're very, very esoteric.
Mm.
He was very influenced by people like Ebola. This is like blatant esotericism,
Mhm.
and it's very much in line with a lot of the same kind of, theosophical kind of premises. Obviously they're talking about accelerating technology essentially towards the singularity. So there's nuanced differences in their perspectives and their how they're going to foment things and what the plan is, if you will. Let the plan of love and light work out, as they
Mm.
say. But he does talk about, like, he has this document. It's so creepy. It's hyper racism, and it's
I don't like the
essentially
title of
like
that already.
right, hyper
Like,
racism. And so we have to go beyond racism. So this is
oh,
like the dialectical evolution of racism.
I
Go
think some
beyond
people
it,
are
right?
some people are way ahead of him probably, but
And yeah, well, Elon Musk is doing his job
yeah.
because it's essentially positive eugenics using genetic selection. So that's what it's all about, is using and that's what Elon's doing. He's using CRISPR-Cas9 and you know donations and petri dish. He's taking the humanity out of the procreation process.
Mhm.
And I think this is a part of that whole thing with Sinclair. I think part of that whole thing was to desensitize people to and dehumanize the procreation experience, so to lay groundwork
Hmm,
for acquiescence to the transhuman agenda. Um, I mean, I don't know, but it seemed like propaganda to me.
that's very interesting. I
Actually,
had Ashley
Yeah,
s Ashley St. Clair. Oh, yeah, yeah, that
Sinclair.
whole thing, yeah. Well, that's very interesting because I've done a lot of work, thinking about the sexual revolution and its impact on civilization, which I don't know that we fully understand yet. But one of the things that I hadn't considered, which I think might be a very good point, is by depersonalizing and desacralizing sexuality and making it cheap and commercial and ultimately easy to acquire and fundamentally meaningless, not even for procreation, and even to the point where new generations are checking out of it. It's interesting that that does pave the way for, ectogenesis. It's just raising children outside of the womb, or germinating children outside the womb. Maybe germinating might not be the best word, but that's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but I can see if that wasn't the original conscious intention in the first half of the 20th century, that it could be repurposed for that very easily.
Yeah. Well, I actually do think that was largely, I think it was a depopulation agenda. It
Mm,
was to dehumanize, destroy families, destroy relationships. Um, I actually think there is a biological component as well. Humans are not meant to behave in that kind. It's not the healthiest. So
right.
there are intergenerational ramifications to that, and studies have been shown on those types of experiences that people have. So I think it was multifaceted, but I think it was very destructive. I also think that it ruins the core fabric of relationships. This is this generation. Now, I mean, now it's very different because everything's online.
Mhm,
That's got its own set of problems. But I know, like, for my generation, you saw like the Sex and the City era. That's what I
mhm.
called it. And you had characters like they would take quizzes. Which character are you? And of course, Samantha was touted as like the you know ultimate
Cougar.
feminist and and what was she doing? And that was being promoted as like the way women should live and that we should embrace that. But ultimately, it prolongs marriage, it prolongs any kind of meaningful relationship, it prolongs procreation. And it also undervalues human life because now you're incentivized if you happen to be in experience and you have a baby as a result. And now, well, maybe you're not ready or whatever, and so it's okay to do discard. It devalues human life. I mean, that's essentially what it does. And again, I'm not saying this from a place of judgment to judge anybody's experiences or choices. I'm just looking at it from a sociological phenomenon. What is the result? What does it do? And I can't really look at it in any way other than to look at the result and say that that was intentional. I just think this was a psychological operation designed to dehumanize and depopulate.
Mhm. Yeah, and everyone's super invested in this way of being because it's quote unquote pleasurable, right? But we can be often led astray by the pleasures that we pursue.
Is it really pleasurable though? I mean, I think that was also kind of a lie.
Mm.
I'm not saying that there's never any short-term pleasure.
Sure,
It's not what
sure,
I'm
sure.
saying, but but is it really pleasurable to have experiences that are devoid of real meaning? That don't have deep attachments and significance. I don't think that that's truly pleasurable for humans. Humans
Yes.
want to have secure attachments and build something and, have foundations that, uh, you know, blossom into something. That's what
Mhm.
humans want to do. I mean, we're only here for a short time. So to think that we just chase a hit of something now, I mean, we're biological creatures. And of course, there, you might have a short term pleasurable experience, but we really look back on it, I don't think it's not fulfilling, I guess is a way to say it.
Yes, exactly. I think that's probably closer to what I meant. Like it's
Yeah,
maybe sensual, right? That we set up the
yeah.
difference between
No,
sensual
and I
versus
think
fulfilling.
pleasure is right, but it's not fulfilling. Yeah, I think
Correct.
you're yeah.
Yeah, it's as we pull on all these threads, we can see the kind of web that
Mhm.
we were to much extent, even those of us who are awake to it, we're all still kind of like stuck in it. Like we're not lost in it. We're not like Neo in the Matrix. I don't want to get all Gnostic with it, right? Like little G, but there's a way in which that this is the fabric of reality that we find ourselves embedded in at this moment. And so as we just talk about all this, I just my question is, as you research all of this and you do the primary source reading, and man, you've talked about stuff that even I haven't heard of, which is awesome. How do you stay grounded in the midst of all of this? And maybe we can close on this as people begin exploring these many of these topics, whether through reading or videos or your podcast or some of mine. How do you stay grounded amidst all of this overwhelming information?
Oh, that's a big question. I guess, yeah, it's a big question. I think you just have to I mean, you have to find your why. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing whatever it is you do? What are the things you love? What matters to you? And then just find things that are outside of it altogether. Find things that give you pleasure and fulfillment, both. Uh, that are meaningful, like, your relationships and also things that are, like, relaxing and detached. So, I mean, I personally really like my physical stuff outside, I like to make sure I get to the gym, that's really important to me, and, spend time with my family, and yeah, I don't know. I think it's, I don't think it's easy. It definitely can be dark. And I would actually say sometimes reading all this stuff is less dark than watching some of the madness online.
Mm,
Sometimes that actually gets to me much more, like all of these cult of personalities. And I think sometimes I feel like I'm screaming into the abyss, and that can be very frustrating.
mhm.
And I wish people would engage more with ideas. Yeah, so but the ideas themselves, I mean, we're always going to be on a journey because we are limited. The Gnostics did get that right. In that regard, we were limited. We are not perfect, but I don't believe we can be perfected.
Mhm.
That's where we differ. And I think that knowledge should be a tool. It's not to create self apotheosis and self divinization. It's not for that. It's so that we can navigate. And for me, that's why I say it's to inform, inspire, and empower. It's really about free will. So I feel like the more information I have, then I am better equipped to exercise my free will. And that's what I hope to impart onto others, is to give them a sense so that they're not caught in these webs. They're not caught in dialectical churns. They can step outside the wizard circle.
Mhm.
They're not like totally. None of us are going to be impervious to programming or to, some extent of the brainwashing and all of the various mind games and propaganda. But I think that the more we can learn about these various things and the history, then maybe we can fine tune our discernment and not fall for every one of them.
Mhm. Yeah, to not be taken capture by either our reason or our faith, but to maintain them
Right.
both quite healthy so that we can not fall into the many. I love that you heard the term use the term wizard circle. I've been listening to some James Lindsay lectures where he talks about the same thing, how many wizards are trying to draw us into the circles and how many circles there are. And we have to, through our own discernment and our own information, and our own, right hearts, stay out of all of them.
Yeah, well, they are. I mean, they're, linguistic masters. This
Hmm.
is, they play mind games. They cast spells through
Yeah.
language. And so it is literally a wizard circle that they're putting around you. And so I actually mean it quite literally. Some of these people they consider Magnus in their various respective fields. So I think we should recognize them as humans and deal with the ideas themselves so that we're not as susceptible to the hypnosis.
That's a really good point. Is listen to what they're saying and unwind the ideas that they're saying to you, and don't go after the man or the woman. That's
Mhm.
not going to stop anybody from doing that. But ultimately, the way that you liberate yourself from the wizard circle is not by killing the wizard, because you're still in the circle.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, it's about, well, what did they convince you of? What spell did they cast? That's what you should be dealing with. I mean, if you look at it from a biblical perspective, right? It's battles of powers and principalities, right? So
Hmm.
it's not you're not dealing with the person. These are these powers and principalities, and I think that's the same thing. It's these various ideas, it's these concepts, it's these worldviews, and I think the less we idolize or vilify people, I think that the better off we'll be in escaping some of these wizard circles.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for all the work that you do in providing just an incredible output of liberating information from a lot of these, again, wizard circles and ideas. I'm continually astounded at how much you are able to process and make available. And I think everyone listening can kind of hear what I'm talking about a little bit.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So where would you like to send people to find out more about you and what you do?
Well, CourtenayTurner.com, and I do spell my name a little bit differently. It's
Mhm.
pronounced Courtney, but I spell it like Courtenay. And lots of people like to tease me and call me Courtenay, and that's totally fine. But if that helps you spell it, it's CourtenayTurner.com. And that's where you can find all of my various podcast platforms, all my social media. I have a contact page, and of course, all the ways you can support my work. And I started a Substack, I guess, about, I don't know, I want to say like 6, 7 months ago now, maybe. But I am putting all of my podcasts out there, ad free and early access for my paid subscribers. And it would be a great help to me. I know not everybody's in a position to do so, but this takes up a tremendous, exorbitant amount of time and
Does.
resources. I mean, just for the platforms, it's actually quite expensive to do all this. So any help is always greatly appreciated. And yeah, so you can get all of that on my Substack. And I have really been working to try and get articles out to you as well. Although it's really hard to get all of this done. There needs to be more hours in the day. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, to synthesize and harmonize and express all of the information simple enough for just someone who's involved with it casually to understand. Like I know how difficult that is. So thank you.
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Thank you. It was for me as well.